edition of the Linux SIG, and at the moment, it's a case where we rescheduled uh, the meeting for today, even though it's the November content. We also rescheduled December's meeting to be on December the 19th, a Thursday evening, because there is no Northwest Computer Club in December. Got a line here, and I don't know what's causing it. Hang loose for a minute. Before I get, uh, I still don't know what's causing the black line in this video. Yeah, it's on one of the other screens. This is the problem with having to have multiple screens. And where the heck?
Looks like one of your screens has the meeting controls showing.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't have it anywhere that I know of.
Hmm. Whatever you just did temporarily got rid of it.
Okay, we'll try that. Okay.
You
I
changed workspaces.
Yes, I used Workspace too. I had also clicked 3. All right. Anyway, this is nutty. But anyway, it had been requested in the past, and I've had a desire for quite some time to work up some kind of a NAS or home server. Now, uh, with that in mind, there are some gotchas. Tonight's stuff goes from simple to the more complex. We're not going to get through everything by any stretch of the imagination. So you'll have to get the handout to go through a lot of the videos. But anyway, one, like a network attached printer, you have to take and give a static address to any kind of a server type attachment to the network so that it has a constant, just like your house address, so that everybody who mails you anything, including junk mail, can the post office can deliver it knowing what your address is on your house. Same concept with static addresses. Another thing, you can get away in some people with a very low processor, such as an N95, N97, N100. I would discount using an Atom processor. They stopped making them a number of years back, anyhow. And you can, some people can get away with a Celeron if it has 4 cores. Same for Pentium, but it'll have a little bit better performance than a Celeron because that's the next step up. And after that, you go to an i3, an i5. Really, nobody needs an i7 or an i9. I know Drew, who is not here tonight, uh, has an i9 system. The key is how many cores. If you want to do virtualization, where you're doing it on the server, the virtual machines, and displaying them on your regular desktop system or laptop, etc., because you have to share your cores and your memory. Now, the other piece is memory, and you can on some systems get away with as little as 4 gigabytes of memory. I don't recommend that. My minimum is 8. And if you do any virtualization, the minimum should be 16 for a single share. If you have more than that, or depending on what you're doing on the server as well as the virtual machine, you may need to go to 24, 32, all the way to 64 gigabytes of memory. My minimum memory type is a type 3, and I have all the rest of my systems on 4. I have no systems currently on DDR5. I do use NVMEs as well as SATA drives in older systems that don't handle NVMEs. Uh, I You really want to have the OS for the computer on an NVMe if at all possible. A SATA is a backup, so to speak, of a minimum requirement. You don't want to put the OS on a spinning hard drive, even 7,200 RPM. So these machines, what do we want them for? What do we use them for? That's a complex question that is going to potentially be different for lots of different people. Uh, a lot of us are used to taking an external uh, drive and doing a backup of a desktop, laptop, tablet, or phone. And that's fine up to a point. But when you have a lot of machines like me and some other people, you have lots of data and God knows what else. This is when you start getting into the need for NASs and servers. The two are almost synonymous anymore. It used to be a NAS was very, very simple, very limited as to what it can do. Nowadays, NASs themselves are servers, as well as there are other things that are traditional type servers that give you lots of additional functions and features as add-ons. And most NASs nowadays will give you the ability to do add-ons that give you extra functionality. I also have tonight a document I'm going to disseminate through the chat. This is from Earl, and Earl had a request, and I'm not saying yes, no, or maybe about it. Generally speaking, ooh, got here. Hang loose for a minute. Hang on a minute, folks. No, I don't want that one. Ah. And you don't want to leave. I'm going to stop sharing. I have to. Because this thing is not playing nice with me. as is. Now, what I'm going to try and do in the chat is to give you a document from Earl. Earl, you don't have to respond. I'm asking anybody else, including those who aren't here tonight, to respond to Earl's letter to me or wait until the meeting of the 19th to discuss it. Uh, Basically speaking, I have been using uh, NVMe quite a bit, and in doing so, I mean not NVMe. Uh, pardon me for 1 second here. It's EFI. Excuse me. So I have Linux on EFI, but Earl is saying that if it wasn't for the setting up his system on the EFI, he might not have gotten some firmware updates that he did get offered. Also, too, it's to some extent a security issue, and the fact that more and more of the old machines that don't know how to handle EFI are going to be disappearing rapidly. That leaves us with machines that do know EFI. We might also take advantage of it. But I've played with at least 3 different Linuxes. They all do things slightly different. So it's not a clean, simple topic from my point of view. So, in that vein, I'm saying basically you have a situation. Dennis, I see you just came in. I'm gonna because you can you see in the chat, Dennis? I have a document called Earl's letter. Do you see it? Yes or no? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry. I just had some major problems going on here. No, I didn't see it. I saw like a folder with 3 documents. I didn't see an individual document. I saw like a folder opening with three
That's
documents in it.
different. The documents in the chat. Go
Oh,
into chat.
no, I'm sorry. My chat is empty. Probably
All
because
right.
my thing timed out when I was gone.
Yes. And so I'll put it back in chat again, but
Okay,
I
thanks.
I gotta get out of this. I gotta stop, and it's the only way I can get into chat to send the darn folder. Well, the
Okay.
document. Okay. So
Yeah,
Dennis, you should have it. And as I was
I see it.
saying,
I see it.
this is a letter from Earl, and I want either an email feedback or I want you to wait until the 19th to discuss it. It has to do with even using a Linux with EFI as well as Windows, and I don't know if Mac anymore. I haven't been on Mac in a long time, so I don't know if they have anything approaching that. And I'm going to come up there and I'm going to
So,
shoot myself again.
so I need to read that letter, and it's need some kind of reply is needed, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, uh,
Could I make one observation
no, go ahead.
You can make two
regarding?
now.
Okay, I actually do have more than one, but I'm only going to make one regarding the claim that legacy BIOS doesn't do Linux firmware updates. That has not been my experience. They do.
Well, I have seen where in some cases it does, as you're saying, but I've also seen cases where you switch from non-EFI to EFI and suddenly other things start popping up that weren't there before.
Right.
So,
Linux will detect that context change.
yes. And in the case of firmware, it may, in some instances, require the EFI to get it.
For some firmware. And I'm going to stop there for this meeting purpose because I've had a very lengthy experience with firmware and with drivers and with managing hardware that was not cooperating well with Linux.
Oh, yeah. But so far, at least for me, and I know Earl and probably Dennis, I set their systems up, and we used Earl in particular wanted the EFI, so I put that on his, and I when I set up Dennis's, I put it on his system too. So at least three of us here are using EFI on Linux.
Yeah.
If
Well, let me interject that my KDE Neon Linux system using the Discover update tool, it explicitly said, we will not, or you cannot update firmware without EFI.
That may be a KDE thing.
Maybe it is. But the reason I brought it up is that, well, what's changing in firmware that might be beneficial?
One of the
And
one of,
That's where I want to stop for this meeting because we could hold a whole meeting about that.
yeah,
understood,
well,
but
just
KDE
let me tell you,
Neon.
I had a 500 megabyte firmware update after I did this, and that was amazing to me.
KDE Neon is based on Ubuntu. So I don't know that it's a KDE characteristic.
KDE Discover is what he said.
Yeah, well,
That's
he's
unique.
got a KDE desktop because it's KDE Neon. That's what it's called.
KDE Discover is a special software library, a special repo, and
Yes.
it's not found in Ubuntu. So that's
Uh,
what Earl is saying.
well, it's part of the KDE desktop.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the KDE ecosystem. It goes
Right.
deeper than the desktop because, again, we could get into the various layers of an operating system and where the desktop environment falls within those layers. But again, that would be about 3 or 4 more meetings.
I'm just putting it out there to see what feedback I get, and at the same time, too, it's a case where I think there's going to be more and more Linuxes offering it. I know of three, and so bottom line is it's something that is going to be more and more prevalent, I believe. That's my opinion.
Yeah,
And
the one other thing is there is a change going on in the Linux kernel philosophy. Drivers are no longer being included in the kernel. They're moving to outside of the kernel.
User space.
Yes. And I am seeing this on both Debian and uh, Ubuntu derivatives.
is that good or bad?
It
huh,
is good for several reasons that are too technical to really go into in depth here. But there are security reasons. There are kernel maintenance reasons. Kernel maintainers don't like to have to do certain kinds of work, and they're correct about that. And it also has to do with manufacturers. Don't forget, most drivers are manufacturer specific.
yeah, and most drivers update at various irregular times. And the only way you may get a new driver the old way is with a new kernel that you don't have right now. So you have to wait for them to create a new kernel that includes the newer driver for something in your system before it actually will work on your system.
Yes, this gets back to what happened with my Chromebook, where LMDE with its default kernel could not drive the touchscreen driver, which is part of the system on the chip.
Right.
But a more recent upstream kernel could.
And this is a headache that's been around for years. Most people, especially on Linux, I don't think really were that deeply bothered by having the kernels integrated into the kernel.
Right.
It usually didn't cause much of a problem. But as I think with all the security issues, all the changing hardware that we are experiencing in the recent years, it now becomes a case where it is causing some problems having it integrated to the kernel. And now there's the movement to put it outside, just like Windows has, and I'm pretty sure that's true of Mac OS as well.
Yeah, well, Apple being an integrated ecosystem, it wouldn't matter as much, but
Right.
they have done it. Part of the reason is because of the ARM architecture, which changes a lot of stuff that I don't think we need to get into right now.
Yeah, that's
But
correct.
the one thing I was going to say was about bringing it outside of the kernel virtualization. Virtualization also works a whole lot better if your drivers are outside of the kernel, because most of your virtualized stuff in Linux happens in your var directory, or it may even be a separate partition.
Okay, I'm gonna attempt to do something. I'll be darned. Okay. It wiped me out. There was a setting I forgot to set. Sorry about this for... No, it should have opened up, and it didn't. Okay, why not? I'm gonna shoot somebody somewhere, sometime. At any rate, we'll get it one way or another here. Now this takes a little time because except for one of these, they're all videos, and that takes a while. There we go. Got most of it. So I'm going to start here. And
Now, running your very own home server is incredible. There's so much you could do with it, whether that be hosting your media, setting up your own private backup solution, using it to monitor data. There is truly a lot you could do. But that brings to question, what should you use on the software side to actually run your setup? In this video, what we're going to do is go over the 5 operating systems that you are probably going to consider when making this decision. What I'm going to do is go in order based on the first one that I used as my primary home lab software, all the way up to what I'm currently using now and what is my current favorite. And the very first thing I used, and one of my favorite pieces of software, has to be Proxmox. Proxmox is really cool because it's not the typical operating system that you think of. This is more of like a dedicated virtualization and hypervisor environment. It uses Debian Linux as the actual base operating system, but what you get with the web GUI and all the containerization and virtualization features is absolutely remarkable. All the way to the point that you could use this as like your base operating system and then use every other system that or any of the other systems we're going to mention in this video in addition to it if you would like to. The installation process is real easy and straightforward. I do have some separate videos on Proxmox including that installation process and actually passing through hard drives to various virtual machines on your Proxmox instance. But when you first install it and you log into it, you get a really beautiful dashboard going over some typical monitoring things that you would want to see. And then actually setting up virtual machines is really easy. You can set up like a server virtual machine and use that as its own dedicated, like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, really whatever you want. and then proceed to do whatever you want in that server, whether that be install Docker, put all your services and whatnot on there, or you could even use their containerization options, which uses way less system resources than an entire virtual machine, and then you could put something on there like a single service, and it makes it really nice to be able to separate out various different things. And overall, using Proxmox to manage your network infrastructure when you do set it up properly and how you want to, it is a wonderful thing to use. And in addition just to using it as a home lab, I used it for quite a while, having like a Windows virtual machine in there and actually being able to remote into it, because with this you can pass through dedicated GPUs and whatnot directly to specific virtual machines. So I actually used Proxmox with Windows in it, with DaVinci Resolve in there, with the GPU properly passed through, and I used a virtualized environment for my main kind of video editing workflow for quite a while. So the use cases for this are really limited based on your imagination. Now at the moment I'm not using Proxmox anymore, and that's not because it's not good or anything like that. Just my needs are being met by other software that's, at least for me, a little more user-friendly and straightforward, and we will be talking about those in just a sec. But first, I do need to thank the sponsor of today's video, NordPass, one of the best password managers in the game. With NordPass, you can save time and energy while boosting either your personal security or the security of your company. And just beyond the tip to the video. Now next up we have TrueNAS Scale. You could also use TrueNAS Core. This is the TrueNAS website here. So you have Core and Scale. Scale does provide a little bit more features. This is a software specifically for NAS type environments, network attached storage. And overall, when it comes to a NAS solution, as everything you'd expect, it's really easy to get set up various RAID configurations. So you have redundancy, and if a drive fails, you're going to be okay for the most part. Overall, the dashboard is beautiful. You can kind of see a little preview here. Again, I'm not currently running this. The reason I'm not currently running it is it kind of gets a little weird when you are using a volume that you're using in a container as a shared volume. It just kind of gets a little messy. I could also just be an idiot. That's probably more likely the case. But here we can see some of the features. Of course, it supports Docker containers and Kubernetes, which is nice. Being able to run Docker containers in your NAS software is almost essential. And all of the operating systems going forward here have the availability and the opportunity to run Docker containers. Docker is my main thing that I use to run all of my services. It just makes everything super simple and easy. There's no like dependency issues. It's beautiful. I'm not going to talk about all this, but you can really see a lot of the various features it has. OpenZFS is the main kind of file system structure that they got going on. TrueNAS gives you a lot of settings and whatnot to actually make configuring your setup really easy, and they do actually support virtualization, so you can spin up like a Windows virtual machine, a Linux virtual machine, and kind of still have the same features and accessibility that you would have with something like Proxmox if you just want to run this, for example. Our third mention is going to be CasaOS. This is more of a newer addition to this kind of niche category of operating systems. This, I'm pretty sure, is another kind of Debian base with their own software, dashboard, and web UI plopped on top of it. This is made by the same company that makes the Zima board and now a couple other products, the Zima Blade. They're coming out with the Zima Cube, which I hope I get to check out. But when it comes to user friendliness and just kind of beauty of the environment that you're placed in, this is definitely up there. And even their website here kind of reflects that. You can see an example of dashboard there. If I go back up, I do believe there's a live demo. So let's just jump into that real quick. And here we go. Here's the demo. So we have our storage here. And you can see, like most of the other, or all of the other services we're going to be talking about, there's your system status right there. We have our apps, which are just Docker containers. And then you have some other integrations, such as some smart home stuff and integrated data synchronization tools. If we go up here, this is where you can have access to some of your settings. This is more beautiful and more user-friendly, but that does come at the expense of some features that you would get in something like TrueNAS or some of the other things that we're going to be talking about. Granted, this is an Ubuntu base, so you can't just log into that Ubuntu base, or not Ubuntu, Debian base, apt, whatever. You can log into the base operating system and really do whatever you want. I have a full separate video where I really dive into detail of some of the stuff that this has to offer, including the installation, and that is something that is stupid easy. The one thing that is kind of limited too is they don't have a lot of applications in their store, but you can install like Protainer beside it if you want to and run Docker containers that way. It just won't show up as well in here. I'll say like unrelated Docker containers. But ultimately, if you're really just looking for something just to get started that's really easy to manage out of the gate and has the smallest learning curve imaginable, Casa OS is going to be a really good option for you to get started. I'll link down below to the other video if you're interested more in an actual like walkthrough demo of this specific operating system. Next up, we have Open Media Vault. Now, this one is a little more simple. Again, like a lot of these, it's based on Debian Linux. It provides you a really nice dashboard. One of the things that makes this really nice is it's awesome when it comes to volume management. Just like with TrueNAS, it's really easy to set up your RAID configurations. And if you're familiar working in the terminal and working with Debian, this is going to be a pretty good option for you. Definitely not the most user-friendly approach, especially if you are new to all this. But if you do have some Linux experience, Open Media Vault is going to be a good option, and then it does help you with some of the more advanced things, such as creating shares, creating snapshots of your shared folders, again, volume management, things like that. If I go over here to some of the more features, we can see here it does really support a lot of things. Makes it really easy to set up things like SSH, SMB services, and there's various plugins to hook up into other services as well. Open Media Vault is pretty lightweight. They don't have a ton of features, but there's definitely a little bit more than something like Casa OS when it comes to setting things up and the overall configuration. I enjoyed using this. I used this kind of the same amount of time as I used TrueNAS, about 2 months or so. But this one I did enjoy a little bit more just because of how accessible the base operating system is, how easy it was to share, for example, my Intel hardware transcoding with Docker and all that. Just overall, this is a really good solution, definitely worth checking out. And finally, what I'm currently using, if you watched my last couple videos on like my home lab and all that, you probably knew this. Unraid. Unraid, unfortunately, is the only one that is not freely accessible. You can see it's going to cost you anywhere from like $50 up to $130 if you have like a whole bunch of hard drives. But I'm more than happy to make the argument that this is definitely worth the price tag. This right here is my current Unraid dashboard, and you can see it gives me a lot of information, a lot of live statistics, data. I have my UPS stuff right here, various users, my shares, virtual machines, which I currently don't use, and that's one of the reasons why I don't use Proxmox. I don't have a need for virtual machines because everything I need is running over here in the Docker containers. And this has a lot of the same functionality and everything as something like Open Media Vault, TrueNAS, so on and so forth. But the amount of settings and things that you could do just making this easy to use and upgrade is ridiculous. There are things that you could do, or there are settings to like move all the files from one particular drive if you want to upgrade that drive. Setting up NVMe cache drives is really easy, and using those for like specific share folders is easy. They just make doing things that you would expect to be really complicated surprisingly easy to do. For example, right here under app data, this is my kind of Docker share. Primary storage, I have that set to cache, and if I go over to main, for example, you can see my pool devices here. My cache is a 2 terabyte NVMe. I should add another one so it can be mirrored so there's no data loss potential there. If I go back to the dashboard, that's why it's a different color there. It's letting me know like, hey, there's a potential risk associated with this specific share, and that is because there's no RAID or redundancy setup, parity drives or anything like that. But speaking of parity drives, if I go back over to main, this right here is my parity, and when I do want to upgrade, it's going to be as simple as taking that out, popping a new drive in, and rebuilding that parity. And all these are 4 terabyte drives, and I'm eventually going to want to upgrade those. And like I said, it's real easy just to dump all the files from this one, for example, spread it out over the other drives and upgrade it. Granted, Unraid is not perfect. The one thing I completely dislike about it is the boot device system. It requires you to use a USB for the boot drive, which sucks. You can see I have a 30, technically 31 gigabyte data traveler right here, which I'm currently using as my boot drive, and the license that you purchase is associated with that USB. So if something were to happen to that USB, you'd have to contact support, and that's probably not the greatest thing, especially if you have a drive failure and it's the boot drive with a license, and that's a time sensitive matter. You don't want to have to contact support. It just adds some potential risk having a USB boot drive like that. Granted, I haven't had any issues, but just knowing that that could be a problem is not great. Being able to use like a small NVMe SSD as the boot drive would definitely be preferred. But when it comes to Unraid overall, I definitely just prefer it. I prefer using their kind of app and Docker system here over something like a Portainer. They have a real nice system we have recently added here. Top trending apps, top new installs, so they have a good kind of marketplace to see everything that's going on. Definitely a lot more kind of apps versus something like Casa OS, where in a lot of cases they actually have multiple options with multiple kind of configurations. So for example, if I search something relatively popular like Plex, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Plex images, and you could kind of see the configuration options when you go ahead and click on them, the stars they get and all that. And these are just kind of basically customized Docker Compose configurations based on what people think are best, and overall it's really nice. If I go to Docker and I click on something such as Jellyfin, for example, if I click on this, you can kind of see what I'm looking at. It's all your typical Docker settings, just in a really nice layout. So here you can see the pass-through of the Intel hardware acceleration, all my various ports for the web UI, so on and so forth. And then we have some more settings here if you want to change any of that. Overall, some really cool stuff. And this makes it really easy to update anything, so I don't have to install something like Watchtower. I can actually see when an update's available, and then I can click on update. So if I apply update to this torrent client here, yes, update it. It opens up like this and actually shows me live exactly what it is doing. So you can see all the various layers and containers here. It's going to go ahead and pull all of them, runs through the whole process for you, sets everything up, removes the orphan image, click done. Boom, you're updated. Good to go. And just within everything, there are layers and layers of various settings and features to help you just manage and run everything just more efficiently and easier. Shares are really easy to set up. You can see kind of how we have everything set up here. And actually in settings, we have a whole dashboard of various things. Network settings, NUT settings, various network services, and then within every single one of these, so like SMB, for example, you can see I have it enabled, and some of the settings associated with that. To actually change it, I need to stop the array, so we're not going to do that at the moment. VPN manager built into here, which is nice. And we have community applications. Of course, you could go through and add various plugins and whatnot. So you can see here, these are the plugins I have, which are different than actual like applications. We have Intel GPU top, so I could see the status of the actual GPU component of this. NUT tools, Unraid Connect, community applications, and a file manager. So this is an add-on, and this is real nice. If I go to shares, for example, and here under data it adds this. So if I click on that, I can actually browse and view everything and edit, copy, move, delete, do permissions, a whole bunch of stuff through here. So it just makes everything really nice. I personally recommend Unraid. I use it. For me, it is definitely worth the price. If it was double the price, no, I wouldn't have bought it. But at its current price, that they do have it priced up accordingly. So those are the 5 kind of NAS or virtualization operating systems that you might want to consider installing on your home server software or home server hardware. Quick little honorable mention, this is just running on one of my machines. On another one, I actually just have a base Ubuntu server install with Portainer running. You don't even need to necessarily use a specific kind of special niche use case operating system like this. You could really do and get a lot of what you need to out of just a regular base Linux server install. Granted, if you want to do some like volume management, you want to set up some RAID configurations, there's going to be some work that you're going to want to do in the terminal, and definitely for something like this, I do prefer a dashboard where it's a lot easier to kind of visualize what is going on. But for example, on the Nook, which is what I have Ubuntu server installed on, it is purely just a couple different Docker containers on there. And if you're not setting up like volume management and a bunch of shares and whatnot from that server, just running a base Linux install is probably going to be perfect. But when you do start needing features like shares and you need to do things such as set up various RAID configurations and you want to be able to easily upgrade things and whatnot, that is when you are going to want to look into something like this. So, with all that, I do hope you have a beautiful day. Everything I mentioned will be linked down below, including additional videos where I kind of go a little bit more in depth into some of this software. I haven't covered everything, so I might post some other people's videos down below if you are interested. Again, have a beautiful day and goodbye.
Okay, now what I want to do here.
It's been quite a while since I updated my current home lab setup, and oh boy, there has been a lot of changes. Even down to the dashboard here. Now, running your very own home server is...
I'm going to pause it. I remind people, always look at these side suggestions. Sometimes you will find additional ones that may be able to explain some things that you're having a problem with. Also, go to below the video, click on more, and it gives you more information that may help you with hardware and or software that that particular video is using or discussing. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, as far as what he brought up on the 5 OSs, most of them are based on Debian. Very solid operating system. And it doesn't change a heck of a lot over the course of, I think, 2-year life. But at the same time, too, he brought up Proxmox. I consider that as a potential major installation that most of us probably will not touch. Then you have servers like COS and Ubuntu OS. Right now, Casa OS is not as feature rich in the application store that you can add features to it. I'm sure that will come along. Ubuntu has a big store, but some people are a little leery about all the changes Ubuntu does make, so you have to make a choice. The TrueNAS is a great feature and can be added to many of these other OSs to do the NAS function aside from a server function. And then Open Media Vault. To me, it sounds like Open Media Vault is the simplest, easiest thing to set up. Next to that might be COS, even with its limitations. And then TrueNAS and Proxmox would be the high end. That's my view, my opinion. Now, I haven't gotten into this. I've been playing with the idea of building this stuff. I just have never gotten around to it. Right now, I'm on a attempt to set up a open media vault system for the 19th meeting we have for December. And basically, what I'm going to use is a mini computer, but some of the Nux style computers, like Bob Premick has, as an example, they can hold 2 drives. One is usually an NVMe drive. That's where you'll put your operating system of choice. And the second part is a facility to hold a 2.5-inch SATA drive. And I don't have big 2.5-inch drives. I think my largest is 512 or in that ballpark. Eventually I'll get something, probably 2 to 4 terabyte in size. I want to use it kind of like what Microsoft would call a SharePoint in a Windows operating system, whereby I have a simple OS that's easy to set up and maintain. I have a single drive in the system. There is no mirroring or anything like that. And you would share files instead of saying using flash drives to copy program files and or data files from machine A to machine B to do something else with that stuff or install it, etc., etc. I'll just use the NAS. Now, the next thing after that would be looking at Casa OS and TrueNAS machines as far as that goes. Don't jump the gun for anything in that, at least until after the 19th meeting, because I've got some things that I can show, or I hope to have some things to show. Out of the videos that I have in the handout tonight, this is barely around 1/4 of all the various pieces of software that I have mined in this topic area. So I've got a whole heck of a lot of material yet to go through. I guarantee you I will not get a whole lot done between now and the 19th. It's just I don't have enough time. One other thing, your machine doesn't have to have Wi-Fi. And I put an asterisk next to that. Why? First off, NASs usually plug in with as short a cable as you can manage to your router. Your router has Wi-Fi. Anytime you're doing Wi-Fi from your regular workstations, it goes to the router's Wi-Fi, and then it gets redirected to whatever device, such as a network printer or a NAS server, home server, or plain server. Another factor, most of these systems use a web-based dashboard. So you're using your web browser on your regular system, putting in necessary information in the URL field, and attaching to that machine. Now that machine can be physically in your home, but you can also put these machines somewhere else, such as a relative's home that's away from your home, in case of fire, flood, tornadoes, hurricanes, whatever. At the same time, too, those you remote into, even though you haven't moved from your own home, you're attached to a computer that's somewhere else. You're basically doing that anytime you're doing cloud computing. Anything cloud computing like OneDrive, G Drive, etc. That's cloud computing. You're going from your workstation all the way out into the internet and attaching to somebody else's machine. Or in this case, it might be your physical machine just in a remote location. You have to understand also that some of these various OSs that you set up may use the terminal, which a lot of people don't like. because it's command line. Very few have a traditional desktop like you are seeing on your computer right now. It's an overhead that is not desirable on these kinds of devices. So they don't generally use them. Does that mean they cannot be used? The answer is no. Any Linux, BSD, Windows, Mac can all be used as a server if you want to. But normally you do not do direct work on a server. You use your workstation that you're looking at right now, and you tap into the server to either pull in files to your workstation, work on them, and maybe put a copy back. Or you are, if it's a movie, you're just watching the movie on your workstation that's stored on the NAS. These are different concepts than what most of us are used to in that respect. Now, the one other thing that comes to mind is when you see these videos, a lot of them are made by people who are doing something temporary to demonstrate something to you. They use simple passwords. You got to use good, strong passwords, because if somebody gains access to your server, they got the gold mine, and you may or may not be able to do much about it unless you're very quick in being able to disconnect your house basically from the internet. So you have to keep various pieces here in mind. Now I'm gonna go into the next video, and it's in the same vein as that video.
Hey everybody, this is Christian, and in this video I want to talk about one of the challenges I had once I started to build my own home lab and I tried to find a good operating system that I wanted to run on my home servers. Because when you're starting to look for server systems, you will quickly find out it's quite overwhelming how many different solutions there are existing. Yeah, we have all these different Linux distributions, we have virtualization technologies, NAS softwares, and so on. There are literally hundreds of viable options you could choose from, and even for an experienced tech guy, it's sometimes a challenge to find out what are all the different capabilities and limitations of these systems. Nowadays, with all the other complicated stuff we have in IT like automation, Docker or Kubernetes, it hasn't really become easier. So I thought, let's discuss some of the options you have for running a home server. I'm going to tell you what I'm running in my home lab, how I'm solving different tasks like virtualization, storage and automation, and what I believe are the best operating systems for these specific use cases. Because yeah, you can already guess it, there isn't this one and only solution that is best in all situations. That's what I can tell you right from the beginning. But still, I want to give you some guidance on which operating systems and solutions there are existing for home servers, and what might be good in one particular setup, and in another one you might just have better alternatives. So it's gonna be an interesting session. Let's start and talk through some of the options you have for running a home server. This video is supported by Teleport, a free and open source access proxy that helps you to securely authenticate to. Okay, so first I want to talk about what I call the classic operating systems for servers, yeah, Linux and Windows. And let's start with Linux, because I believe that's what probably most of you would like to run somewhere in a home lab. And that for a good reason. Linux is just an amazing operating system for home servers, because it's free and it works nearly on all systems, no matter if you would like to build a big server with lots of computing power and storage, a small power efficient machine for your home lab, or just a tiny Raspberry Pi. Linux just runs on all of these devices. It's very stable and you will find tons of free and open source applications for it. You can build all sorts of scenarios like running a network storage, installing a web server or databases, run virtual machines. The sky is the limit. And that's why I've also installed Linux on my first home server here, so that just seemed to be a perfect solution. And I can tell you, it's absolutely incredible from an experimenting and learning perspective. Of course, when we talk about Linux, we actually just mean the Linux kernel. Yeah? If you'd like to run and install Linux on your home server, you will need to choose from hundreds of different predefined software packages around it, the so-called Linux distributions. And this is where it already gets a bit complicated, because when you ask people what is the best Linux distribution for running a home server, you will probably get many different answers. Some people will say, oh, it's Debian, some others say Ubuntu is the best distribution, some others will tell you it's Red Hat or Fedora, because it is just a very subjective, in some communities even a controversial topic. And you will see there are always people around who claim they found the best Linux distribution for running their desktops and home servers, and in a few months they completely switch to another one, which is from then on the best Linux distribution. Yeah, so I'm not going to follow this discussion. Yeah, I would say there isn't this one and only Linux distribution that is best for everybody. It just depends a lot on your needs and personal preference. But just to give you a good starting point, when you want to install Linux on your home server and you really have no idea where to start, I would just try out Ubuntu, because for me, Ubuntu is still my top one Linux distribution, and I always recommend it because it's great for beginners and pros as well. Again, I know people have many different opinions about Linux distributions, but honestly, I don't care. Ubuntu has been great for me on all of my servers for almost 15 years now, and because that hasn't really changed over time, you can probably guess it is a good and reliable choice for running your servers as well. Actually, in the last few years, since containerization has come up, the choice of a specific Linux distribution as an underlying system has become less important, because a lot of the workloads today that are running on servers, they aren't running on the main operating system anymore. When I'm thinking about it, I'm barely administrating Linux these days. Mostly I just run a few updates and a couple of other packages. The real applications, the workloads, I'm running mostly in a container, which is completely isolated from the other packages that are running in the host. And here, the Linux distribution actually doesn't make such a big difference, because containers, they are standard across all these solutions, no matter if you're using Red Hat OpenShift or Canonical's micro Kubernetes on Ubuntu, Rancher's KFreeOS, Docker or Podman. Which Linux distribution you are using for your home servers doesn't matter so much as you might think it does. However, if you still want to have a comparison about some great Linux distributions for home servers, I've made a video about this in the past where I'm diving a bit deeper into the actual differences of Ubuntu, Debian and some other options. So if you'd like to check it out, I've put you a link in the video description. And by the way, because we were just speaking about my other videos, if you haven't already done it, like this one and subscribe to my channel. That would be so kind, because it really makes a difference in the YouTube algorithm. Back to the topic. So, in a few words, Linux is amazing, especially if you're into containers, Kubernetes clusters, but even if you don't, yeah, it's a great choice as a home server operating system, and you can probably just pick one of the popular Linux distributions that are good for servers and then install it on your machine and just deploy your workloads on it. But this is just one of the options for running a home server. There are many other solutions and setups I want to talk with you about. For example, Windows is also an option. Some people will now say, forget about Windows, but I always like to be a bit of a counterweight against this Linux fanboyism, because Windows is still the most used operating system in the corporate world. That doesn't necessarily make it a good choice for home server, of course, but still, if you are into home labs and tech stuff, you should keep an eye on the Windows server. And for some people, it might be good. If you don't like to be on a terminal, or you have a very specific use case, maybe a couple of applications that only run on a Windows operating system, then the Windows Server can be an option. However, I understand that Windows Server might not be the preferred system to run a home server for most people, yeah, because it requires a license, and overall, Linux is, in my opinion, just the better choice in a direct comparison here. But still, it is a nice side project to take a look at. Maybe not as your main operating system, but for running it in a virtual machine. Which, by the way, takes me to the second group of solutions I'd like to talk with you about. Because if you're like me and you like to run and test many different operating systems and applications, running them all on separate physical machines, that would be quite inefficient and also expensive. You would probably end up buying just hundreds of different home servers. And that is why you should really use virtualization whenever it's possible, yeah? That allows you to run multiple operating systems on one single machine. So you don't need to choose one operating system and that will be your main one forever. You can always try and test out new things, like different Linux distributions, we just talked about that, or install a Windows server on it. There are so many great things you can all do with virtualization, and although you can run virtual machines on a Linux distribution like Ubuntu, there are, in my opinion, better platforms around just made for that one task. Because running and administrating virtual machines requires a bunch of different softwares and packages you need to install and manage. You need a virtualization layer, obviously. Maybe you'd like to have an interface to easily manage and create new virtual machines, or you need to take snapshots, configure backups and monitoring. And that can all be quite painful to set up yourself under Linux, trust me, because I've tried it before. That was actually the main reason why I stopped running Ubuntu directly on my home server's hardware. Once I started to look a bit deeper into virtual machine management or storage pools with the ZFS file system, I realized setting it up on a Linux distribution myself like Ubuntu requires a lot of additional work and skills. And you can really save yourself a lot of headaches and trouble if you just pick one of the hypervisor platforms that you install on your home server first, which usually comes with a nice interface and all the other tools like managing backup, storage and networking, and then just run a Linux or maybe a Windows server on top of it. However, this obviously throws up another question: which hypervisor platform is then the best for your home servers? And I'd just like to cover a few solutions that I've been working with in the past, and I also want to tell you what I'm using right now. For example, there is the Microsoft Hyper-V, which is now free by the way, and you can just use it to run virtual machines with all types of operating systems, such as Linux servers or other Windows servers. I've worked a bit with the Microsoft Hyper-V in the beginning of my IT apprenticeship. Yeah, we had a couple of small and medium-sized businesses where we just used this as an operating system to virtualize multiple servers. Honestly, I don't like it much, because compared to other hypervisor platforms, the Microsoft Hyper-V is a bit limited in terms of feature set, and it's really annoying to administrate. What I've also been working with during that time was VMware and the free hypervisor ESXi. That you will probably see often in the enterprise field, in a data center for example. But also in smaller environments, you can work with the free VMware hypervisor ESXi. It is a great solution for virtualization. However, I have to say that is also a system that I personally wouldn't run on a home server, because a lot of the advanced features of VMware are licensed and they can't be used on the free version of ESXi. For example, I like to automate the deployment of my virtual machines with Terraform, and this requires write access to the API of the hypervisor, which isn't supported in the free version of ESXi. And I just don't like messing around with this complicated licensing stuff, or just other smaller things like the old and clunky web UI. They scared me away from VMware a long time ago. In my opinion, there is a better alternative hypervisor platform existing that is just perfect for personal home servers, and you can get it completely for free. For most of you guys, it won't be surprising because it's Proxmox, which is an open source solution based on Linux and KVM. It allows you to virtualize all sorts of workloads. Yeah, you can even build high availability clusters with it. It has some nice features for managing storage and containers, and it is really great with automation. For example, I've recently made a video about how to automate virtual machine deployments with Proxmox, Terraform and Packer, where all my VMs are now defined as code. That allows me to spin up new servers with pre-installed packages and configurations in just about a few seconds. That is absolutely incredible. It also has an API functionality or metrics logging that you can integrate into your monitoring solution. But even if you're just starting to explore virtualization as a beginner, Proxmox is very intuitive to use. It has a nice and clean web interface that you can easily use to create new virtual machines, add containers or storages, manage backups and snapshots. All that stuff is really very straightforward, and once you start playing around with it a bit more, you're going to love all the advanced features that you can use, like Cloud Init, create VM templates and deploy them through API. All the time that I've used Proxmox, it hasn't disappointed me. So when I would need to pick one favorite operating system for my home servers, I would say it's Proxmox. There's just one problem you might run into when you try to install it in a smaller home lab, because it doesn't work on ARM-based CPUs like a Raspberry Pi. I've seen there is a similar project around that's called PyMox, but I haven't really tested it. And honestly, I don't know how much sense it makes to run virtual machines with the limited hardware capabilities of a Raspberry Pi. And so in that particular case, if you just want to start building a home lab with a Raspberry Pi, you should still go with a Linux distribution, something like Ubuntu, skip the virtual machine layer and just deploy your workloads in containers instead. But I can't really see any other situation where you would not like to run Proxmox on your home servers. Maybe just one more, and that is when you are not primarily into virtual machines. Maybe you sometimes play around with it, but your focus is more on storage and you would like to have a more complete all-in-one solution for your home server that's easy to administrate. This is the third group of system that you could use in my opinion, and this is using a NAS system such as TrueNAS Scale. Even though the original idea of a system like this is to build a network attached storage, it has become far more than that. For example, I've recently made a video about TrueNAS Scale saying that this might be the perfect home server operating system because it isn't just a great storage server anymore. By the way, you can still build a great storage server with it. You can bundle multiple hard drives together in a redundant and high performant pool and use it as a NAS machine, but it also allows you to easily run and configure hundreds of useful applications and packages that you would typically run on a home server. Just take a look at the amazing TrueCharts project that's made by the community of TrueNAS Scale that allows you to easily spin up new apps on this NAS system with just a few clicks. I believe they even just released a newer version of that, and you can build your own private storage with Nextcloud or run Home Assistant for smart home automation, a Plex media server. There are so many cool charts and useful home server applications. Sure, you can also do similar things in Proxmox as well, or with a Linux distribution like Ubuntu, but then you still might need to set up a few things on your own, yeah? And you don't have this worry-free solution in a coherent interface like on TrueNAS. So that's, in my opinion, the best possible use case for TrueNAS Scale. If you want a single home server where you can securely store all your data, run some applications for self-hosting, maybe just run one or two virtual machines to occasionally try out new things, but you don't really need advanced virtualization features. You just want to have a reliable, solid all-in-one system that's easy to administrate in a web interface, then TrueNAS Scale will be a great choice. In a direct comparison to Proxmox, you can see where the differences are. Like virtual machines on TrueNAS, they might not have as great features as on Proxmox. You're missing a few automation features like the API and Terraform integration. But on the other hand, you can also do some cool things in TrueNAS Scale that you can't do natively in Proxmox. So what should I say at the end? Yeah, it's not always easy to decide between all these different solutions. As I said, it depends a lot on your personal preferences, on your use cases and your skills. If I would now start my whole home lab project again and I would need to pick an operating system to get started with, I would pick Proxmox as my main operating system to run a home server and then start exploring other options like running one or more Linux servers as virtual machines, try and experiment with different Linux distributions and containerization with Docker and Kubernetes. You probably know all this stuff from my other videos. But if you aren't so interested in these advanced things, you could also go with the NAS system like TrueNAS as your main OS. Or if you're completely crazy like me and you want to even run more workloads in your home lab, just use both. For example, I'm running a Proxmox server in my home lab that's obviously for running my virtual machines. On these virtual machines, there I'm running mostly Ubuntu Linux for Docker and Kubernetes. And then I also have a big storage server that is running TrueNAS Scale. This is where I store all my data for making YouTube videos or any other project files. By the way, in the next video, I should give you a complete tour of my home lab and show you which devices I'm actually running in my server rack, because there are a few more. But I believe that's about it for this video, because I know that was really a lot of stuff, even if I didn't cover half of the other options and alternatives you could also use to run on your home server. I guess many people in the comment sections are now going to ask, hey, why did you choose Proxmox and why did you pick TrueNAS? What about Open Media Vault, or what about XCP-ng and so on? Yeah, I know there are many other platforms and systems and options. However, at some point, you just need to stop looking for alternatives and just go with the solutions that serve you well. Because otherwise, you just end up trying hundreds of different systems and softwares and solutions that all kind of do the same thing, and that's not getting you anywhere in IT. But still, a few choices for running a home server, they probably make more sense than others, and I hope this video was a bit helpful to get a better idea of that. And yeah, so these were the best operating system and platforms that I've used so far on my home server. Please tell me, what are your thoughts about these solutions, or what else are you using? Maybe I missed something important. I believe I probably did. Anyway, I really like to hear from you guys, and as always, thanks everybody for watching. I will catch you in the next tutorial or video. We will see.
Okay, another idiosyncrasy of these servers. Once you set them up, you disconnect your monitor, keyboard, and mouse. That's called headless operation. because you use the browser or an SSH connection to get into them to do maintenance and change settings and things like that. So a headless operation means that you're not tying up a monitor, you're not tying up a keyboard, you're not tying up a mouse on a constant basis. So this is something else that is an idiosyncrasy. Generally, though, you're going to be using your current computers as mainline. Everybody has at least one primary system unless they subdivide their workload amongst multiple primaries. Never update the primary with new versions of operating systems until you've tested it out on a secondary backup like a computer. And if that works out, then you can start doing it to your primary or primaries, as the case may be. So there's lots of mindset that is very different from what all of you are used to when dealing with some kind of a server. Now I'm going to go on from here to the next one. This one's interesting, and I didn't know it was possible until I saw this.
This hard drive 1 terabyte from Toshiba. Another 1 terabyte hard drive from Toshiba. Next to Seagate laptop hard drive 500 gigabytes. This is a solid-state drive with a capacity of only 60 gigabytes. We will install the operating system on this solid-state drive. Another laptop hard drive with a capacity of 250 G from Hitachi. So there are 5 hard drives in all. I will divide them into 3 different groups. Solid-state drive for operating system installation. 3 hard drives used to store data. Toshiba 1 terabyte hard drive has the largest capacity for data backup, also known as parity hard drive. Next, you use a USB stick with at least 2 gigabytes capacity to create the installation operating system. Here I am using an 8 gigabyte USB stick. The operating system used in this video is Open Media Vault. You can use the old or new version the same way. In this video I use version 6.0, the latest at the moment. Just like the previous videos, I used Rufus to create the Open Media Vault installer. Rufus, a compact tool, free and no installation required. Just open Rufus, select the USB stick, then browse to the Open Media Vault ISO file. Rufus will erase all data on the USB stick, then create the Open Media Vault installer for you. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. You safely remove the USB stick to avoid damage to the installer. Then you plug the USB stick into the target computer and start installing Open Media Vault. You add all the hard drives to the target computer. In this video I add 5 hard drives to the target computer. The hard drives I introduced to at the beginning of the video. After plugging in the USB stick and adding the hard drives, you start the computer and access the BIOS. I'm using an Asus motherboard, so when I start the computer I keep pressing the delete key. Our goal is to set up the computer to boot from the Open Media Vault installer. SRT USB 1100. Save the settings and restart the computer. The computer will boot from the Open Media Vault installer. Set language, I choose English. Set the server name, the default name of the server is Open Media Vault. Domain name, choose default setting. Next you are asked to create a password for the root admin account. This password will be used in the next step, so you should write it down, especially with a password that is difficult to remember. Because the computer has a lot of hard drives, you have to choose which hard drive to install the operating system on. Here are 5 hard drives and a USB stick. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will be installing the operating system on a 60 GB Seagate solid-state drive. Leave the default and press enter. Skip proxy settings and choose continue. The installation is complete. You can remove the USB stick and restart the computer. When starting your computer, make sure to boot from the solid-state drive. Here the computer is set up to boot from the Seagate 60G solid-state drive. Save the settings and start the computer. The computer boots the Open Media Vault operating system for the first time. Wait for a while for the computer to boot up successfully. On this screen you will know the IP address of the computer. Username is admin, default password is Open Media Vault. On another computer on the local network, I open any web browser and enter the IP address of the NAS server. 10.11.32.226. Username is admin. Default password is Open Media Vault. First, you set up the dashboard. Like here, I choose to show all information like CPU, RAM, network, hard drives, and many more. Storage is disks. You first initialize all the hard drives, except the hard drive where the operating system is installed. Here I will reinitialize the hard drives SD, SDB, SDC, SDD. The first hard drive is Toshiba 1 TB. You select the hard drive and click Wipe. Choose the Quick method. Next is the Hitachi 250 GB hard drive. You select the hard drive and click Wipe. Choose the Quick method. Next is the 500 GB Seagate hard drive. Choose the Quick method. The last hard drive is a Toshiba 1 TB. You do not perform this step with a 60 GB Seagate solid-state drive. After initializing the hard drives, you create a system file for the hard drives. Storage file systems create. Here are 4 hard drives that need to be created with system files. You create system files for all 4 hard drives one by one. Default system file is ext4. You just need to select the hard drives one by one and click Save. Next, you mount those hard drives. For each hard drive you leave a comment. It will be easier for you to configure snap rate in the next step. Here SD hard drive is data 1. SDB is data 2. SDC is data 3. And SDD is parity. To combine hard drives with different capacities, we use merger FS. To back up data with parity hard drive, we use snap RAID. To install snap RAID and merger FS on Open Media Vault, you need to install OMV Extra. To install OMV Extra, you access the Open Media Vault server using SSH. You open a Windows command prompt and enter SSH root IP address. You enter the password set up when installing the Open Media Vault operating system. As in the previous step, I set the password to 123. To install OMV Extra, you just copy and paste the command as above. It will take about 30 seconds to complete the installation. That's it, the installation of OMV Extra is completed. Next, refresh the Open Media Vault management page and you will see OMV Extra in the System menu. After installing OMV Extra, we will install Snap RAID. System plugins. Type Snap RAID in the search box. Select Snap RAID and install. After the installation is complete, you will find Snap RAID in the Services menu. Next, I installed mergers to combine different hard drives into one. System plugins. Enter merger FS in the search box. Select merger FS and install. After installing merger FS, you will find merger FS in the storage menu. Next, we set up Snap RAID. Service Snap RAID disks create. With these 4 hard drives will be divided into 2 groups. With 3 hard drives commented as data, we will configure content in data. Three hard drives, including a Toshiba 1TB hard drive, a Hitachi 250G hard drive, and a SIG 500GB hard drive. The hard drive is commented as parity. We will configure it as parity. Please note that the parity hard drive must have a capacity greater than or equal to any other hard drive. And our parity hard drive here has a capacity of 1 TB. With Snap RAID, I have 3 hard drives with the same configuration, 1 hard drive configured as parity. After completing Snap RAID configuration, I use merger FS to combine different sized hard drives into one. Storage merger FS create. I named it Pool 1. Then select all 3 hard drives configured as data. I choose the hard drives Data 1, Data 2, and Data 3. Save the configuration. Very simple, right? And this is the result you get. 3 hard drives have been combined into one with a capacity of 1.56 terabytes. Next, we set up shared folders so that everyone can upload and download data. You create a new user. Users create. I create a new user nav. Password is 123. Next, create a new shared folder. Storage shared folders. Name the shared folder. I named it test. Next, select pool 1, which was just created from the previous step by merger fs. Pool 1 has a capacity of 1.56 terabytes pooled from 3 different hard drives. If adding a hard drive, you can add a new hard drive here to get more space. Next, you allow the NetVN account to have read and write permissions with the test folder. To share folders for Windows computers, you need to enable the SMB service. Services SMB. Then enable the SMB service. Next, you add the newly created test folder to the SMB service. Thus, the basic configuration steps are completed. Now on my Windows computer, I access the shared folder. I type run in the Windows search box. To access the shared folder, enter // IP address. Username is nat, password is 123. To easily access the shared folder of the NAS server, we set up map network drives. // IP address / shared folder name. Enter an account if required. To check if my NetVN account has read and write permission to the test folder, I upload some data. Upload successful. Let's check the used space on the hard drives. So I uploaded about 1 gigabyte of data. Next, I recommend you to set up a static IP address for the NAS server. Network interfaces. Edit. Here you set up a static IP address that matches the range of IP addresses you are using. With this NAS server, I set the static IP to 10.11.32.226. Next, we schedule data backup for Snap RAID. System scheduled tasks. You have a lot of customizations to set up the scheduled time. Here I set up daily backup. The sync command is snap RAID sync. So your data will be synced daily. Alternatively, you can sync manually. Everything okay? When checking the usage capacity of the parity hard drive, there will be a change. So I've introduced how to build a NAS server from different sized hard drives. Also, your data will be automatically backed up daily. But that way your data will not be synchronized in real time. With Open Media Vault, you can use a lot of utilities. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Okay. Now,
Tim,
yes.
I'm going to leave now because I have to.
I can't-
I did find the YouTube video on my other machine. This one looks like it may be the one I want to use. I'll see you next month at the 18th or whenever that is
the 19th.
for the next meeting,
19th.
the 19th. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'll segue in here.
Everybody.
If you use this method that was in here and they're using the SMB, the default is work groups, which is what it also is on Windows. I recommend you change it from work groups to something else. All machines have to have the same name. This Thursday is West Side meeting. A week from the day is Tips and Tricks SIG. 2 weeks from today is the South Suburban SIG. And 2 weeks from Thursday is the rescheduled Linux SIG, because I'm not going to do this on Christmas Eve. So I hope to see all of you there. I'm going to continue on while Peter has to leave. This one you might not like, but I have a reason for putting it in there, so bear with me.
So, recently I got asked this question on a video, and initially I replied with absolute shock and horror. But after a follow-up with the commenter, I realized this is a question worth answering. Yes, you can use Windows as your NAS operating system. And in this video, that's what we're going to be doing. Granted, the Linux gods are going to look down on me with disgust and horror. It is possible, and it's a fairly easy process. Now for this, you don't need a dedicated NAS necessarily. A lot of the steps in this video you can do if you're just running like your single Windows desktop computer and you want to get some NAS functionality out of it. I will have timestamps down below so you can skip around to whatever sections are applicable to what you are trying to do. But throughout this entire video, there will be various tips and tricks that will make this a fairly smooth experience. And I will preface this as smooth as it can be. Desktop Windows was not built to be a NAS operating system, and there are definitely better options out there. I personally recommend something like Unraid. There's TrueNAS, Open Media Vault, even something like CasaOS. There's a ton of other options. But again, I mean, if you're running a Windows desktop, you want functionality out of it, this is great. Or if you just really love Windows, this is the video for you. Some of the features that we're going to be setting up, of course, is a RAID instance. We're going to be setting up various network shares. We're going to be diving into Docker and spinning up a service or two. We're going to be accessing our NAS through remote desktop connection, which is going to act as our NAS GUI, which is literally going to be the Windows desktop. And of course, I will show you how to connect to all of this externally outside of your home network with our sponsor, TwinGate. TwinGate is an awesome VPN alternative that uses zero trust networking, and it's really easy to set up. You just set up connectors on whether that be your users, but that's all I'm going to say about it because we're going to actually be diving into how to set up some of that stuff near the end of this video. So with that, again, there are timestamps, so if you already have a Windows install, you can skip around, but we're first going to be starting off with putting Windows on our USB. I believe the minimum requirement is 8 gigabytes. And if you have anything on your USB, you're going to want to make sure you back it all up because what we're going to do is going to completely wipe it. First things first, go to the Windows 11 download page. You're going to want to scroll down, click right here, Windows 11, download, and then from there, it's going to give you the language option. Pick your language, hit confirm. It will begin downloading. While it does that, we're going to go ahead and grab Rufus. The reason we're using Rufus over some of the alternatives is they have some fantastic options to make this whole process a little smoother and easier. Once you have all that ready, you're going to want to plug in your USB. You can see I have it plugged in right here. Make sure you do pick the right device if you have multiple things plugged in. From there, you click select and pick the Windows 11 image that you downloaded. We're going to click on open, and we can leave most of this at default. I'm just going to change this for fun. Let's do Win USB, and then click on start. Now this is where we get some of the options that really make this nice. You can select really what you want and customize this how you see fit. But this right here is basically my default selection. I disable the data collection, disable BitLocker, I remove some of the requirements and create a local account. The one recommendation I have is do this something simple, no spaces. I'm just going to do admin. This is going to be the admin account of the NAS that we are creating. You can do your first name, you can do whatever. I just recommend leaving out spaces because later on it makes it a lot easier to connect with like Linux devices and things like that, which is really weird to think about, connecting to your Windows server from your Linux desktop. So we're going to hit OK, and then it is going to warn us that all the data is going to be gone. We're going to click OK again and let that do what it needs to do. And while it does that, the device that I'm going to be installing this on is the TerraMaster T6423. This is the NAS that I've been running forever as my Unraid instance, but I did recently switch that out for the 6-bay Ugreen unit. So we got a free NAS to desecrate. And I would say the specifications of this NAS in particular are probably the minimum requirements that you're going to want to actually do this. You can see here it has an Intel Celeron N5095, quad core at 2 gigahertz. Right now it only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, which again, Windows eats up a lot of it. There are better options for a dedicated NAS unit. I can upgrade it if I want to, but I'm just rocking the 4 gigs for now. Setting up file shares and a couple Docker containers, it's going to be fine. And I have 6 4-terabyte drives in it. All right, we are finishing up, and it is ready to go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull my USB out, plug it into the NAS, get my other keyboard I actually have plugged into the NAS, and then boot here into the BIOS. Depending on your motherboard, it could be a variety of keys, somewhere between delete, escape, F1, F12, F11, something. But here I am just going to go and select my boot as my USB drive, and then we are going to save changes and exit. There we go, booting into Windows. And I tested this out earlier. The display drivers are absolutely cooked until I get the drivers updated. I'm going to go all English and go next. Install now. Now I don't have a Windows product key. The only thing I'll say is there are some fantastic resources on GitHub. Let's go like that. Here is the edition. It doesn't really matter. I just generally always go with Pro. All of the features that we're going to be utilizing, I'm pretty sure are available on Home if you happen to have a license for that. So accept their terms of service. Let's go next. And then from here, we're going to go custom install. So this is the drives, and if you have a lot of drives in your system like I do, it may look something like this. And you can see these are all basically 4 terabyte drives. And the drive I'm actually going to want to install Windows on is this one right here, drive 6. I know this because it's a pretty small 128 gigabyte NVMe SSD. For sure, install Windows on an NVMe SSD or another SSD, as installing really anything on a hard drive kind of sucks. So when you know the drive you want to install it on, all you do is go ahead and delete all the partitions. So I'm going to tab, delete, okay, and then we go all the way down again, and then we just repeat the process. So down, delete, okay, until the entire drive is unallocated. And then you'll see drive 6 is completely empty, so all we do is go ahead and hit next. And it should begin the installation process. And then when that's done, our computer or NAS is going to go ahead and restart. There we go. Now, other than my absolutely cooked display drivers, you're going to notice this is a lot better Windows install experience than we normally get. After, of course, using Rufus. Going to run a little update. Hey, there we go. Just dropped us right in. All we had to do is pick our language and keyboard layout, and we're good to go. It takes forever. The best Windows installation experience still is not a good one. Well, look at that. We are in. I pulled up my updates, started downloading all of them. I need drivers so it doesn't look like absolute garbage. So we will come back when this is completely done. All right, so after a few quick reboots, all the drivers are in and we can actually see what is going on. So now I'm going to go over some important settings that you're going to want to change, and starting with the device name. If we head over to the settings application, and let's go down to system here, we can see right here the current device name is desktop and a bunch of random characters. This is the current host name, and we want to change it to something a little more recognizable and easier. So if we want to log in with third-party services, I'm going to call this something like WinNAS. as it is our new Windows NAS. So I'm going to go next, and there we go. To actually rename and change the hosting, we're going to restart, but before that, we're going to change a couple more settings, so let's restart later. And now what we're going to want to do is actually enable network discovery. So to do that, we're going to go to network and internet and click on our internet connection. It's currently set to Ethernet. I would definitely recommend using Ethernet if you do plan on using your computer or whatever as a NAS unit. And we're going to want to go ahead and switch this over to private network. As we're going to be keeping this device on our home local network, we're going to want to switch to private, and this will expose it so we can access remote connect, shares, Docker ports, things like that. So now let's go back over here to network and internet, and we're going to want to go down to advanced network settings. And then from there, we're going to go to advanced sharing settings, and we're going to want to enable file and printer sharing. This is what gives access to the files that we have on the NAS after we go ahead and share some folders. And then from there, we're going to want to head over to our power settings. I'm pretty sure it's under systems. And then if we go to power, what we are going to want to do is go to screen and sleep and completely disable sleep. If your computer does go to sleep, you won't be able to see the file shares or have access to it. Now, in a situation in which you do want your computer to be able to go to sleep, but still kind of function as a NAS, there's actually a group policy thing that we can change. Do note that you are probably going to need to somehow ping the server to kind of wake it back up, but doing this does make the network card active, so if it sees something going on, it's going to wake up your computer. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and close out settings. We're going to go to a little more of an old school application. This is going to be the group policy editor from the control panel. So let's go ahead and open this up. From there, under computer configuration, we're going to want to go to administrative templates, and then in there, we're going to want to head over to system, and then we're going to want to go ahead and scroll down to our power management folder here, and then under sleep settings, there's going to be something we want to change. Make this a little bit bigger so I can see what is going on here. And then we have this option right here, allow network connectivity during connected standby. Give that a double click, and then from here, we're going to want to just click enabled, and you can see if you enable this policy setting, network connectivity will be maintained in standby. And we're just going to go ahead and hit apply, and then OK. And now from there, we are going to go over to our device manager and make sure that a certain packet is enabled on our network card. So if we go over here, let's minimize that and go under network adapters. We have our controller here. We have two of them. I'm going to do it for both of them because I'm not sure which one my internet's plugged into. But right click that, go over to properties. And then here under advanced, it is going to be the Wake On Magic packet. We can see that's currently enabled, which is good. And then from there, we're going to go over to our power management tab here and allow this device to wake the computer, as well as only allow a magic packet to wake the computer. We're going to hit OK. Now real quick, we're going to reboot the system. 1, to enable that policy. 2, to change the hostname. And 3, to check our BIOS here real quick. All BIOS look a little bit different, but you're going to want to look for an option like this that says Wake on LAN. Make sure your cards are enabled here. And here, if you want to, you can enable S5 via RTC if you want it to turn on automatically at a certain time. But for now, I'm going to keep that disabled. And one thing with Wake on LAN, I'm pretty sure Fastboot is not supported, so you're going to want to make sure and leave that off. I could be wrong. Somebody will correct me in the comments. But from there, I'm going to save changes and exit. And now we are going to log in here real quick. It may ask you to change your password if you used the Rufus method. And now to test this, I went ahead and set the sleep settings. So that way it will fall asleep after 1 minute. So I'm going to wait that minute for the device to shut down. And once it does shut down, we'll see here if it fires up when I connect to the network tab, which that tab kind of pings out to everything to see what is accessible on your network. And that search to see that should be enough that it fires it up with Wake on LAN. And if it does work for network discovery, it should work for other services such as Docker containers and things like that. And I just saw the fans kick off. There's no lights or anything. So if we head over to network tab, it's firing up. And then it should pop up after it wakes up. And there it is. We have WinNAS, which we can log into now. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to change our password. So I'm going to log in. Oh, it's not going to be that. It is admin. Type in our password. Remember the credentials. Sign in. And here we go. folder is currently empty because we have nothing shared. So now that our little NAS at least functions like a server when it comes to the power and accessibility on our network, we want to access it remotely. I don't want to be plugged into it. I want to go move it somewhere else. So in this case, what we are going to do is remote desktop. And if you're running Linux, you can still access Windows Remote Desktop from those machines. You use a different software, but it basically works the same. We're going to go down to remote desktop settings here, and then we are going to simply enable this and confirm it. We can see our PC name, WinNAS, nice and easy for us. And now we have remote desktop users here. If you do have other users, you can add them, give them access. But you can see here, admin already has access, so we are good to go. Now, one way to connect to it is by right-clicking right on the device and connecting with remote desktop connection. I'm going to change the settings just a bit. So if we go over here and I'll get this keyboard out of the way now. Remote desktop connection, the actual application. This was the last computer I connected to, and now we should just be able to go WinNAS, just like that. You can see the username automatically filled in as admin. I'm going to show some more options. Head over to display, and it's already at 1080p, which is what I was going to want to do anyways. So you can go ahead and mess with some settings here if you would like to, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit connect. There is a certificate warning. It's our computer. We just set it up. It's going to be fine. Don't ask me again, and yes. And will you look at that? We now have access to our server. So now our next step is going to be create a RAID. We do have a bunch of hard drives in this thing, and Windows actually does have moderately decent built-in tools to be able to do this. So if I go down here to search and I do storage, and right there, manage storage spaces. We're going to click on that, and here we have our storage spaces. This is combining drives. We're going to go ahead and create our new storage pool. We're going to say yes, and here are all the drives in the system, disk 0, 4, 3, 1, 5, 2. It does a pretty good job about not putting your actual boot disk in here, which is what we installed on the SSD, but do make sure if you have other drives in here, like if you have a bunch of stuff you want to put in a RAID and you have a 1 terabyte drive that just has like your Steam games on it or something, make sure not to select it because this is going to wipe the drives. So boom, let's go ahead and create our pool. And there was no errors right there, but if you do encounter an error I encountered, it looks a little bit something like this. It may say can't create pool, and the issue is the physical disk sector size is not supported by the storage pool. If you run into this, what you are going to have to do, I'm going to cancel this out real quick, and then we are going to go ahead and open up, create and format disk or hard disk partitions. And then what you're going to have to do is go to these specific drives. So for example, disk 0 here, right click on it, you're going to make a new simple volume, go next, keep the defaults here. You can assign whatever drive letter you want. It doesn't matter, we're going to be reformatting it again. And here under the allocation unit size, go ahead and change it to 4096 for every single drive. And it's going to look something like this. So I'll actually just go ahead and do this. Let's go next, finish, let that do what it needs to do. And there we go. We have the new volume. And technically now, since I did that, it's going to be accessible. Through here, we can see our new volume. It's a single 4 terabyte drive actually showing up now. But what we're going to do is go back over here, create a new storage pool. Yes. And now here you can see there are two sections. There are formatted drives and unformatted drives. I'm going to select all of them. If you have to go through and do that fix for all your drives, everything's going to be right here. I'm going to check it. And if you do have formatted drives, I do recommend viewing the files and making sure you have nothing of importance in there. But we're going to select the entire pool of drives and create the pool. Now from here, we're going to want to go ahead and give it a name. I'm just going to name it something, let's say vault. This is my vault. I'm going to give it the drive letter W for Windows. Unfortunately, we only have the NTFS file system available. The file systems like ButterFS or ButterFS are much better through Linux NAS operating systems. And then we have the resilience type here. This is basically your RAID configuration, but it's not as technical and there's not as many options. You have two-way mirror, so there are going to be 2 copies of everything. If you only have 2 drives in your system that you're doing this with, this is the way to go. We have a 3-way mirror, so if your data is super important, you don't want any risk of losing anything, you can have, it says 2 drive failures here, but me, I always go parity. This allows 1 disk in the array to fail, switch that out, it can rebuild itself and it's fine. Do note that if you pick one of these, it's going to determine how much storage you get. So for example, the 3-way mirror is only going to give us 2 of the drives of available storage, which is just under 8 terabytes. Simple is going to give us a whole 21, but if a drive fails, you're screwed. I, again, like to go with parity, gives us 14 terabytes. That should be good to go. So I'm going to hit create the storage space, and it's going to go ahead and do that. And now we can see here it is created. We're not using hardly anything. This is Vault W right here. It is okay. We can see the actual physical drives. And there are some management things here too. So if you want to remove one, you can prepare it for removal, switch it out if you want to, if one's acting funny or failing on you. You could create more pools if you want multiple arrays, if you have a lot of hard drives in there. And I do recommend doing this through this application because you can also do this, I'll show you. Pool. If we go to manage storage spaces within the system settings, granted it is just a little bit prettier. You can see our storage pool here, all the drives, but it does lack some functionality, especially when creating that the legacy application or version of this has. So now we have our storage pool. If I go over here to Vault, we can see there's nothing in there. What we're going to do now is actually create our shares. Now you can create shares basically anywhere on your system, and that's really helpful for if you're not doing something like this. You can make a share just in your home directory, in your documents, whatever you want to do. But for this case, we're going to create a couple in this vault, which is what I'm going to have people be able to access. So the shares that I'm going to create, you can create whatever you want, do it however you want. But generally what I do is I have a data share, and what that is going to do is be basically everything. It's going to be my movies, TV shows, Linux ISOs, backups, things like that. All are going to end up in this data folder. Another thing that I do is I create one called Docker. This is going to be where I store all my various Docker configurations. And for now, these are the only two I'm going to go with, but you could create another one for like projects, just to organize it however you would like to. And real quick on my host system here, if I go back over to network, go to WinNAS, you can see the folder is still empty. And what I'm going to do is share these. So for example, the first one, let's right click on this, go to properties, and then over here we have sharing. So we're going to want to share this. Let's click on share. We have the permissions for admin. And this is probably really one of the only situations that I can think about where it actually use like additional users on a Windows system, is giving them various permissions in various shares. You can always add a user by clicking right here. You could say everybody, so everybody has access to view this, or you could give view access specifically to an admin. One thing I'll note, let's go ahead and add everyone to this just as an example. You can see the permission levels. You could give them read, write, or just read, remove altogether. And of course, the owner can do absolutely everything. So I'm just going to leave that as is and click on share. That way users on my network can see the files, access various media, but at the same time not have the privileges to move things around, delete things, add things, so on and so forth. So here, your folder is shared. This is the location of the actual share. And you can see here, shared items aren't accessible when your computer is asleep. So again, like earlier, you're going to want to either disable sleep or enable the wake on LAN features. So we can hit done here, and I'm going to close this out, and then we're going to go ahead and share Docker. So if I go properties, go over to sharing, click on share, and this one I'm only going to give to myself because nobody else really needs to see or mess with my Docker configurations. So now it's on the Docker share. Additionally, there are advanced settings, so if I were advanced sharing settings. So if I click on this, you have your shares here, and you can do a lot of things through this little window here. You can add more shares, limit the amount of users per share, add comments, and get into more detail when it comes to the permissions here and all the users that have access to it. So I'm going to cancel that out, cancel. It's already shared, so I'm going to close that out. And now if I head over to the share on a separate computer, open it up, you can now see I have data and Docker. So now if I open up data, what's something I could put in here? Let's open a new tab, go over to my downloads. Hey, we got this hollow ISO, which is basically SteamOS. I'm going to copy and paste that into my data share. It's going to take just a little bit of time to get in there. And there we go, it is uploaded. So if I close this out, go back to our NAS, open up the data folder. Well, yeah, look at that. It is now shared. So now another feature that we might want to go ahead and enable is OpenSSH. I'm pretty sure that's under the additional features and settings. So we're going to go to System, and I believe there is an optional features right here. Let's go ahead and open that up. And here you have all kinds of plugins and stuff. So right here under OpenSSH Client, oh, looks like we already have it. That's good. Last time I did this, it wasn't enabled by default. And close that out. If we go over to services, let's make sure it's running. Make this a little bit bigger here. We got a whole bunch of stuff. Most of it's probably garbage. So go down to the O's. This right here, the authentication agent, we're going to want to go ahead and enable automatic for that. Hit apply, start the service, and then hit OK. So now we can try to connect to this. We're going to need our IP address. If you don't know the IP address of this machine, you can always open up the terminal, type in ipconfig. Here we are, so it's ending in 66. And we're going to check to make sure that everything's in there. So get service name SSH, hit enter. We don't have the server. Okay, let's make sure we have that. Go back to settings here, optional features, add an optional feature. It just said OpenSSH, not server. Ignore me. OpenSSH server. Next, add. All right, that's added. So now go back to services. Sorry, nobody's perfect. Let's find. There it is, OpenSSH server. We want this startup to be automatic, start the service, and apply the changes. Okay, and now if we go over here, beautiful. So now if we open up the terminal on our local system, we should be able to connect with SSH admin at the IP address. Hit enter, awesome. Key is not known, hasn't seen it before, it's our key, we know what it is, so we'll hit yes. Type in our password. So now we have SSH access in our Windows server. If you hit exit, you can go ahead and log out. And I'm pretty sure we could connect with just the hostname as well. So WinNAS, sweet, cool stuff. So that's how you can remote into it with SSH from other machines if that's something you would like to do. But adding that OpenSSH server also gave us access to SFTP, which is another way to connect and mess with the files. So let's make sure that works. SFTP .. // This is admin at, I think the host name will work with this. Not 100%. Admin and then the password. Oh, there we go. Always trust this host. Continue. And now we got everything. Since we are the admin user, we can see everything. And I think to access the share, we can change the letter right here. So W, get rid of that. And there we go. See, we have our data in Docker here. So now we have full access to all that. Under data, we can see the ISO that we uploaded earlier. So now with our file access, file server all spun up and ready to go, let's install some Docker. One of the beautiful things about having a network attached storage beyond its intended purpose, which is a network attached storage, is to be able to run various services and other softwares on it. Now, for a lot of really popular applications, you don't even necessarily need to use Docker. For example, I'm going to do Jellyfin. This is what I'm going to be spinning up, but just for the record, if you just go download now, you have a version specifically for Windows here. So you can just install an exe and get that service spun up, but there's no better time to learn Docker than to run it on something like this. And with Docker Desktop, it's really easy. There's barely any learning to do out of the gate. It has a very nice graphical user interface. Everything's super simple. There's a tons of plugins to make it even simpler. So we're going to grab Docker Desktop for Windows real quick here. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with this installation. And here it is. So I do recommend just keeping this how it is. It's actually going to be using the Windows subsystem for Linux. I'm going to go ahead and continue. And while this does that, I do want to note that for Docker, their documentation is wonderful. There is so many different articles and information on how to use things, various prerequisites, and the core functionalities of Docker. If I go to the Docker docs page here and go over to guides, at least go through these first three. We have Docker overview, which kind of covers just about everything, gives you a brief little insight on what's going on. The getting started, as well as Docker concepts at least. Check out the basics here if this is your first time running Docker. It's a pretty straightforward thing. It's just little containerized applications that are kind of separated from the rest of the system. And it makes it really easy to update, spin them down, customize these services. Definitely a lot more flexibility than just installing a exe service such as Plex, Jellyfin, and many of the others that offer that. So let's go ahead and close this out and let this finish up here. And there we go. So we're going to have to restart our system here real fast. This is one of the things that just sucks about restarting Windows. There's always something to do. Log us in, and now we can see right here we have Docker Desktop. Let's fire it up and accept their little agreement. For this right here, I do recommend you use the default settings, especially if this is your first time doing this. And yep, And we could continue without signing in. You could sign in if you want to. For now, let's skip this survey. And then we are here. And there we go. We're jumping in, starting up the Docker engine. Now, there's a lot going on here. I do recommend you check out some of these, what's a container, how to run a container. But this is just to demonstrate how easy it is to get something spun up. And we're going to go ahead and test this out with Jellyfin. Generally, going with the official is a good bet, but I kind of have a bias for a Linux server down here, so the tag is the version. Going to go latest and pull this image. I could just run it from there, but it might not give me the configuration options that I want. So while it does that, I do recommend you go over to settings up here and do some small changes. First, we're going to start the Docker desktop when we sign into the computer, and then we're going to add the Docker internal names to DNS that can help with DNS issues in the future. So from there, that is all we need to do at the moment. Let's go ahead and apply and restart. And service isn't running. Let's go ahead and start our service there. Yes, that is our privileged helper. Close out settings and wait for the engine to start once again. So now we could go over here to images. We have our Jellyfin instance. So I'm going to just go ahead and run this. Now under optional settings, you're going to want to change some things here. So I'm going to go Jellyfin. Here under host port, this is the public port. So actually being able to access it. So I'm just going to copy what's over here in the private ports. So 89, what is that? 20. Just like that, now we have some volume paths. We're going to add a second one, and for the host path, we are going to select a config. So we're going to go to Docker here, and we're going to make a new folder called Jellyfin. This is where we're going to store our configurations. Select that folder. This is going to be at config. And then we're going to go to the host path again, go back to our vault, and data's right here. And you can see I added in a movies folder so we can actually kind of pull a library. So let's select the data folder, and we're going to place this in data. And then environmental variables, this is where you like attach your GPU for hardware acceleration. You can add a bunch of different things here, specific networking, user permissions, lots of different things. For this quick demo, I'm not really going to do any of that. I am just going to click on run. And then it's going to launch the container. We can see all the information. If there's any errors or anything, that's where you can see it. Additionally, we have inspect, so we can see our full configuration here. We have our mount locations. You can access the terminal directly in this container. This, we can see the files that the container can see, which we can see the data right there, which is good. And then over here, you can view the status. What it's running here, you can see it's really not using too much system resources, which is good. If we go back to logs, we could check to see if it is up and running, which it is. So we are going to access it, and to do that, we just need to head over to our web browser here. If you do remember, the IP address for this machine is 6060, and this is our public port. So if I hit enter, and here we are. Welcome to Jellyfin. Deploy language, English. Let's go ahead, fill out this really fast, and then go next, and we should be able to add our library. So here, content type is going to be movies, and then here under path, we can see our data folder and our movies folder. Got a couple things in there. Let's hit OK. And we have some more library settings. Not going to dive too far into that. Let's just hit OK. And then next. From here, select our regions, allow remote connections, automatic port mapping, continue, and finish. Again, this is running on our local machine and not the server. You'll sign in. And there's only a couple movies, so it should have pulled them pretty quick, and you can see them right there. You can see it's running pretty smooth, and even playing that media really isn't doing too much at all to our server. So that's just an example of the services that you can easily spin up using something like Docker Desktop. Now you may be wondering, how am I going to connect to this outside of my home? And to be quite clear, there are numerous ways to go ahead and do this. You can set up a VPN, you can set up reverse proxies and open up ports, but that's not really too secure. There are a few different zero trust clients that you could use, but for this case, we're going to use TwinGate. One, of course, they're sponsoring this, and two, they're what I would probably be using anyways. So I've quickly signed into TwinGate here. I already use it, so you're going to see a lot of different devices and resources. But it's a pretty simple process. There's a whole bunch of documentation, but first you set up your remote network. When you do that, you give a location. It's going to be on-premise. You give it a name. And then from there, you could go ahead and set up your connectors. So if I go to my remote network, open it up, you can see I have two connectors. One is on my Proxmox instance, and one is in my TerraMaster NAS. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and add a connector, just so I can show you the first kind of launch of connector. You can do this a lot of different ways. You can run this through Docker, run it through Linux. For this case, we are going to go with the Docker, and let's go ahead and generate some tokens. We need to authenticate ourselves, give a quick sign in, and there we go. We have our tokens. I'm going to delete this connector, so don't try to use them. We do have some options here, but we can simply just grab this Docker run command. So here, let's search TwinGate and pull the connector. And when it's pulled, we could go over to our images here, and we have our TwinGate connector. So if we hit the start button under optional settings, we're going to call this TwinGate. And we don't actually need this whole command here. For example, if I see read our Docker compose, really we just need the network, the access token, and the refresh token. So I'm going to get our network, paste that as an environmental variable. We're going to want 2 more of these, which one of them is going to be our access token right there. And then our refresh token right there. I'm going to scroll up a little bit and just copy these tokens, paste in our access token, and then head over to our refresh token, give that a copy, paste that in, and then our network is tech hut. So we should be good. Let's go ahead and click on run, and we can see it right here. The state is now online, so if we head back over here, we can see the connector is up. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is add our Windows NAS as a service. So to do that, we are just going to go to resources here. It's a resource, not a service. And you can see some of the stuff I already have passed through here. If I click on plus for the resource, this is going to be WinNAS. IP address is at 66, and we're going to add it to our main network. Now you can add various port restrictions if you'd like to. The default is to allow all ports. But for example, if I only wanted Jellyfin, I'd pop that port in. If I only wanted SSH, I'd throw in port 22. But for now, we're just going to give full access. And you don't have to give full access to everybody in your TwinGate instance. You could pick your groups. So I have everybody in family. I'm going to go ahead and give this to everybody and grant access. So now we could go ahead and test this out with my phone. I'll just disconnect from Wi-Fi. And you can see here, I am on the TwinGate app. These are all of the resources I have access to. I'm recording this separately, and I did have to change the IP address, so you'll notice that. But if I go to something like my terminal application and then I access the NAS, you can see it's asking for the fingerprint. I'm going to go ahead and continue. And there we are. You can see there I am connected with a local IP without being on the local network. Additionally, we can access our Jellyfin instance, so if we go 8096 for the port, you can see we have access to that. And next we have our RD client, which is the remote desktop client. I'm going to have to edit this real quick. 34, save. And if I go ahead and try to access this, it is going to prompt me for my information. It has a connection. It's asking us if we want to verify this certificate. And there we go. We have remote connection, and you can see we can mess around with just about anything in our new Windows NAS. So yeah, now we have a Windows machine, a Windows NAS, running all the services that I would expect out of a NAS unit. Granted, it is not the best platform to do this on, but like I said in the beginning of this video, if you have hardware, you're used to Windows, you like Windows, it's an option. Better yet, if you have a desktop PC that you actually use every day and you want it to have that NAS functionality, you can follow the shared folder steps, throw some extra hard drives in there and make a little RAID instance. And of course, install Docker and have services running in the background, disable sleep, and it will keep running on your network, so then you could have Jellyfin and other fun services in your home network. And with TwinGate, you can connect to your home network externally and have a good old time. So with that, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please check out my video of the top 5 server OSs. I can promise you Windows is not in that video. Comment down below with any suggestions, tips, and tricks.
Okay. Now, I don't recommend doing this with Windows, but if you decide you want to do it, I'd go here and get Tiny 11. It's a debloated version of Windows 11. And one thing you definitely want on any kind of a service is the minimum of garbage. If you put regular Windows 11 like you put on your desktop, laptop, you are loaded up with all kinds of garbage that you'll never use on the server. So this gives you an option. Now I'm going to take and attempt to put out I can't go over any more of the uh, videos. There's just not enough time. It's already 2 hours into this, and we'd have another 2 to 3 hours just for the little bit I have here tonight. So I'm going to stop my sharing. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to move that. Okay, into the chat. Oops, keep forgetting to. Okay, there's the document. Lots of other videos there, and some of them are quite novel. Even using minis like a Nux as an example. There are some that I haven't got into this group here, using Raspberry Pis as an example, 4 or 5. And the whole thing is there's no limitation to your imagination. And part of this stuff is not only educating you about some things that are available, maybe how to do them, but also to stimulate your own thoughts and how you may use some of this information. Anybody got any further questions before I sign off? Hearing none, I will wish you a good night. Hopefully, we'll see you on Thursday at Westside. Have a good night.